what I'm going to talk about today has been alluded to in several of the other presentations. You know, we can really get enthralled with the technology, which is great. I think Billy even said this at the beginning of his presentation. None of that matters if we don't have a live calf on the ground. And so when we go to looking back at efficiencies in production, to me, we have to manage that factory. You hear this all the time. You can't manage what you don't measure. I pulled this off the Cattlemen software company. They have another little blog where they're doing better management through better records. And I don't care whether you're keeping records in a computer software. I put up Cattlemen. That's one good system. There's plenty of them out there, but record keeping made easy. Is record keeping ever easy? No. But it does allow us to do some things. Now, most of us can carry something around in our pocket. These are very valuable if you'll record things. You can record grazing, get you some kind of record keeping system. And the reason I'm going to harp on that a little bit, how many of you have been through a standardized performance analysis, a SPA program? This is a historical analysis of past production, okay? And it's a past year analysis. And I'm going to use it to talk about some places we lose efficiency in our industry, and that's why I'm bringing it up. I would encourage you at least every once in a while to go through this process, to reconcile yourself with your records and everything else, because as it is the most painful thing I've seen some people go through, but it also is one of the most rewarding things I've seen people go through. And I'm not pimping that out too much. I hope as we get through this, you'll see where it might be beneficial to you. It looks at production data, and we think that's always, you know, everybody can do this general land use description. You start that deal, everything's really easy. And then you come up, they ask, you know, how many cows you have, what's your breeding season, calving season, weaning season, when do you wean? You'd be amazed at how many people can't get that right and can't give you the dates when all that starts when you first ask them. When you start putting that down together and trying to reconcile that with other things that are going on and put in your wean calf, and everybody knows that, don't we? Get the paycheck on our calves, so we know how many went on a truck or a trailer, and we figure that out. But you'd be amazed at how many shoe boxes you have to go through to find last year's record sometimes. On the production side, we also go through the land, the feed, use inventory, and it's almost an accrual accounting adjustment basis to get this back to where it needs to be. Breeding cattle inventories, because this is based off cows exposed to a bull. So you got to think back a year. All right, actually 2 years, because it's a historical analysis. So it's really difficult if you're not careful to get these breeding cattle inventories right. Then we get into these inventory deals, and it gets to be more and more of an issue. Breeding cattle, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but at the beginning and ending of a fiscal year, breeding season, when they were preg checked. Now you notice a lot of this requires you doing some things through the year. So if you're not doing anything, it's not going to help a whole lot. We can make some adjustments, but it's very difficult. But this, I'm going to focus on the reproduction part of it, and it's based on exposed females. Because how many of you have a 95% calf crop? You always hear that. We have a 95% calf crop. I have seen that, but I've also seen the financial side of that little equation, and it's never very good. So you have to be careful with that kind of coffee shop talk. But we'd also do the production side of it as well, but I'm going to focus more on reproduction based on exposed females. Now remember, we're going to look at pregnancy percentage. We're going to look at pregnancy loss, calving percentage, calf death loss, calf crop weaning percentage, and all of these can have losses in them, can't they? All of those are manageable areas where we can fine-tune what we're doing and improve efficiency. In the bottom line of that, it will impact our replacement rates as well. So as we look at the reproductive side, calf death loss based on calves born, calving distribution. Why is this important? The older those calves are, the more they weigh. All right, so those are dollars in your pocket. So that, once again, is fine-tuning. And this is a really good barometer. If you don't do anything else, record How many calves are born the first 3 weeks of your calving season? But this will tell you if you have something creeping into your system. If you start having more calves occurring later in the system, it gives you a good indication something's wrong. Trichomoniasis starts showing up in this number right here quicker than any other measure you can have on an operation. All right, we look at the average calf wean. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. Weaning weights, pounds weaned per exposed female. This database that I'm going to talk about, Stan Beavers up here in Vernon has collected most of this data. He has a website called agrisk.tamu.edu if you want to go in there and look at this information. And we look at the Southwest and look at these measures. The average pregnancy percentage long-term out of that database is 88.7% conception. The weighted average is based on herd size. They do some adjustments based on herd size to change those numbers. So if you want to use the average or weighted average, it doesn't really matter. But calving percentage at 85, but on a weighted basis, it's 81. Why in the world are there 6% percentage points difference between those two? How many businesses do you know of that wouldn't try to manage 6% loss? I think we all would, wouldn't we? But we don't a lot of times, because we don't even know that's what's happening to them. That's why it's so important to go in and actually see what your number is. This is historical data across a multitude of ranches. Your data is what's important to you, and I think that's what's come out over and over again. Calving death loss, they call it calving, 2.5 to 3.5%. And look at weaned calf crop at 82 to 79% of the cattle we expose to a bull long-term in the Southwest region have weaned a calf. Holy crud. 79% of the ones we put a bull with bring something to market. How many other businesses do you know that would put up with that? This is one number, once again, that has not improved since I went to work nearly 30 years ago. We look at the standard deviation in those numbers as well, and I think that's fairly telling. The average is one thing, but how far off of that number do we rotate? You know, this one's up to 95 on the top side, down to 81% pregnancy long-term, or, you know, that doesn't count the outliers. That's just kind of on average. We can see a large variation in calving percentage, even more so than what we see in pregnancy percentage. So once again, these people that have this much variation off that norm can certainly have some things to manage to improve that. We're going to talk about those. These are the losses. We can have pregnancy, we don't get them bred. On average, we're getting about 88% of them bred. On average, we're weaning between 81 and 84% of the, or calving 84% of the cows. We're weaning somewhere between 79 and 80% calf crops. All right, so we've got 19% there that we can improve in efficiency in our operation. If we're going to have fewer cattle, and based off everything we've talked about today and heard today, we better have fewer cattle, right? We better see if we can ramp up the production efficiency in the remaining cattle so we can cover our fixed costs on operations. Cow death loss, that's kind of minor on most places, but I've seen some real problems during the drought on cow death loss from other exposures to, you know, they're grazing in areas they wouldn't graze before. We look at the cow side of this, and this is where I think we have some opportunities, and this is where most of us want to focus in trying to change pregnancy percentage. Now, she is a key player in pregnancy, isn't she? But if we look on the cow side of it, nutrition plays a huge component. We all know that. Body condition, nutritional status of a cow greatly impacts their ability to conceive and carry. There is a genetic component to that. Some cattle are more fertile than others. And I don't think we've done enough yet to segregate our cow herds unless you're ruthless on culling open cattle or late calving cows. If you're ruthless on that, you can improve the genetic component of that. It's lowly heritable, but it is manageable. That's, once again, fine-tuning. But if you ever start making excuses or keeping some cattle and heifers out of cows that are some of those late calvers or intermittent calvers, as I like to call them, it can come back and bite you from a genetic standpoint. The environmental adaptability. this may not be as big an issue in Oklahoma as it is even in Texas. I know it is in some areas of Oklahoma, but we're getting an entire cow herd in the South that is not adapted to the South. And if we're not careful, we're fixing to get bit square in the hiney on this deal. I realize what we need from marketing on a calf, but I also realize fertility, productivity is going to come into play if we don't have environmental adaptability. And I'm not saying it has to be any particular breed. We have to decide which cattle work best. Once again, set our parameters on management and cull those cattle that don't fit. We can build our own environmental adaptability if we'll cull and breed appropriately. Age is another issue, and that's one thing we don't break down in that overall summary. You're getting 88% of them bred, but what are they by age group? Where do you have most of your non-breeders? You got second calf over here. Who else got a group they think's worse than that? I tend to agree. Replacement heifers normally breed up pretty good. Sometimes we turn out more than we really need, so that actually hurts us when we go to looking at this number. First calf heifers, people always say the first calf heifers are hard to get rebred. That's not been my experience. If I take care of the replacement heifers, the first calves rebreed pretty good. But if we kick those second cows out with the rest of them, they don't breed as well. And they're harder to manage because it slip over time. So we actually see some of the highest non-breeding rates in that second calf set of cattle. So is that the one you need to spend some more time on? But if you don't measure that, you don't know which groups you're dealing with, which ones you need to make some differences. All right. When we talk about when do we calve, and that's another thing that we hear a lot about, and there's some people up north that just absolutely drive me nuts, wanting us to push to a summer calving. How many of you have tried that? If you go truly to a summer calving, a lot of times, at least when we cross the Red River, our bulls are not fertile in the summer when we're trying to rebreed. And I've been arguing with them because I don't care what you do up there, but leave us the hell alone down here. Because that gets in all the national publications and people try it, and I've seen some disastrous results by people pushing their calving season back to mimic what they do in the northern states. There are some environmental adaptability issues there, and if you leave a bull with a cow year-round, when do the calves come? Spring or fall, right? There's very few summer calves. Well, Mother Nature tell you when to try to have your calving season if you'll just listen to them. But that's something that I fight all the time. But once again, trying to manage your condition on your cattle and calve them at the right time is really an interesting process. All right, now let's look at the bull side of it. When we get on the bull side of it, age also has something to do with how many cows they can breed. This is something we don't talk about. This is some old data I actually pulled out of an Oklahoma State bulletin. It's been repeated many times. Now this year this bull wasn't here, but started out four different bulls over 5 years. Bull A was breeding 70% of the cows when he was 10 years old. When do we cull most of our bulls? Before they're the dominant herd sire. Interesting little process we have. So if we've got a bull, we want him breeding a lot of cows when he's young, and we'll turn that generation over. Unless they're all young, we're messing up. Because the older bulls, the dominant structure within that breeding herd changes in a multi-sire herd. And it changes with age, and it's darn near linear. As this bull gets older, he becomes the dominant bull. As this bull gets older, he becomes the dominant bull. Poor number D, he's just sitting back watching. They didn't even turn him out this year. When he was a 3-year-old, I guess that 5% wore him plumb out that year before. But we don't know unless we do DNA checks as to which bulls are doing what in a breeding herd. But if you look at social dominance and look, a lot of people will turn a young bull out with an old bull and expect to get a bunch of calves out of him. It's not going to happen. What I think it may do is make him get off his duff and go to work. I really think it does, because that young bull, he's checking them. He just may not get them bred. And so it does improve that visual component of a bull's breeding in libido or libido, however you want to say it, bulls use their vision to detect heat more than we give them credit for. All right, on the bull side, we talked about vision. If they can see a cow in heat, they're going to go. Anybody ever seen an old bull? We were talking about this last night. A bull stay at the watering hole. And a lot of times these older bulls, they'll sit there tapping their toe till the girls come in. The girls come in, some of them are in heat, they'll breed them, they'll stay by their water trough tapping their toe till the girls come back. They'll breed 80% of the cows standing by the water trough. They get smart enough to know that they can check heat, just like you know where to go check heat when you're checking cows. And so they breed an inordinate amount of cows without traveling very far. They're very efficient. Not like the young ones. What are they doing? They're chasing them over the hill, making sure when they get back, he knows they're in heat. That's what they're doing. All right. So when we get this libido or libido, how do y'all want to say that? I'm going to say it one way or another. I'm going to say libido. That's what I've always said. We don't give that much credit, and we don't have a very good way of measuring it. So once there was a serving capacity test developed in Australia, where they looked at how many times they would mate these cows within a 40-minute period of time. But if they didn't breed them, or they only bred them twice within that 40 minutes, the conception rate, once they turned those bulls out onto a set of breeding cows out in the pasture, they only had a 21% conception out of those bulls. And so they just didn't have the desire to mate or the ability to mate, one or the other. If they were to serve those cows 7 to 11 times within that 40 minutes, look what the preg rate was. 97. So if they served them more than 3 times, they were pretty good sires. They get a lot of them pregnant. And so once again, knowing whether a bull is willing and able to breed a cow is important. Structural issues, we all know that. In fact, we spend more time talking about structural things, and I'm going to put in there also mobility. We can have a bad structured bull by evaluation standards, but he can still get around and breed a cow. Some of the worst hock bulls I've ever seen can still breed a lot of cows. This is a picture, and it looks fairly normal, but I don't know if you'll notice right there that little toe is curling. That's a genetic defect in that line of cattle. The outside right rear toe curls. Doesn't show up till they're 3 or 4 years old. That's kind of unhandy when you bought them at 18 months of age, isn't it? So you constantly have to watch them, and they can go unsound from a genetic defect, and this is pretty common in some of the Angus and Red Angus bloodlines. And so I'm seeing more and more of it. I actually saw some in some Brangus cattle the other day. I'd never seen that. Foot rot is another one. Anybody ever had a bull get foot rot in the breeding season? Do you turn him back out once he heals up or leave him out? If you do, you're wasting your time most of the time. They'll almost give up for the entire breeding season because their old foot hurts and they haven't gotten quite over it. That's been one of the most debilitating things I've seen on some bulls. But whether it be leg structure that affects their mobility in any shape, form, or fashion will impact their ability to breed cows. So a lot of times we see low pregnancy rates, and it's not the cow's fault. That's what we're trying to get at. We spend so much time managing that cow, and we turn the old bulls out as we get ready for them. This is another one that has jumped up and bitten a lot of people. Penile abnormalities, deviations, whether you call it a spiral or a corkscrew. It's fairly common, actually. And some bulls don't do it until they penetrate, and then it will do it. But if it ever spins before and gets that twist in it before they enter, they can't get in a cow. And so a lot of it's timing. We see a lot of it in, if we're collecting a bull for breeding soundness exams, they'll have a spiral. So if you ever see a bull and he's got a spiral in his penis and he's not entering cows, you probably ought to go ahead and get rid of him. Hair rings. A lot of young bulls gets to be a problem. They ride one another and they'll get the hair on there. So once again, you can't just take a semen collection at a breeding soundness exam and know whether a bull's good or not. Because if he's got a hair ring around the end of his penis and they don't extend that penis, they won't see the hair rings, they won't see that frenulum adhesions, anything else in that sheath. So once again, all of that needs to be done at a breeding soundness exam. The semen quality. Most everybody will collect semen, look at it, and if it's wiggling, they're good. That's a small part of a breeding soundness exam. Morphology is getting to be a bigger and bigger issue as we go to looking. And we've been working with some herds over in East Texas. And this guy was running in the 60s in his conception rates. And they were looking for disease in every nook and cranny they could possibly find on this operation. When we went back and did morphology on the same bulls that they had passed using motility, 67% of them failed. Now, they had live semen. They had it moving, but it was swimming in circles. So if we're not checking for morphology, motility, abnormalities, I think we're making a huge mistake in our evaluation of our bulls on a yearly basis. What is another thing that should be thrown into a breeding soundness exam nowadays? And nobody wants to hear this, but it's trick. While you've got him there and while you're messing with him, get a trick sample. That is more insidious than anybody wants to admit, and you can get it without ever knowing you've gotten it. I know ranches that are going through the 3rd round of trick just because they can't figure out where it's coming from, or they're not eliminating it. Either the testing may not be as good as it should be either. And y'all ever notice if you ever get a negative trick test on a bull, you're fine with it? You don't test him again just to make sure. And we turn a lot of bulls back out that pass one negative trick test that are still trick infected. So we follow the regulatory guidelines, but not the best management practices for testing for trick. You always test at least twice and 3 times if you want to be 98% sure. Environmental adaptability. You know, and I don't care what breed. Find the breed that works for you, whether it be a Brahman influenced bull or straight bred, it doesn't really matter. Get bulls that are adapted to whatever environment and production system you have. And so I can't possibly sit up here and tell you what the best breed of bull for your operation is. That has a lot of things to go into play. But when you look at cattle that are adapted maybe for more northern climates and we start bringing them in here, we're getting on the edge of some need for some heat tolerance. The color issue is coming to play. We're the only country in the world that selects for black-hided cattle. And we select for them in the heat. I don't know many of y'all that would go out and work in black shirts. I've seen operations where they're using red and black bulls. The red calves will outweigh the blacks 40 pounds. I'm not saying that's everywhere, but similar genetics. So once again, keep that in mind as you're looking at what you're doing. All right, embryonic loss. What causes embryonic loss? One thing can be environment. Heat stress has been shown to cause embryonic loss. So once again, if you're breeding cattle in too hot an environment, the body temperature of that cow can go up and it can cause the embryo to die. They see that in dairy cattle quite a bit. We don't measure it a lot of times in beef cattle, but it has been shown to exist. There's just some spontaneous abortions. All species, sometimes things aren't just right and they abort. All right, so that's something. Now, what is the percentage of those would you expect in a cow herd? On average, it's about 2%. All right, we do the best job we can. We're still going to have about 2% of them abort. Anything above that, we probably need to start trying to manage. But disease and infection can cause, the trick, Vibrio, IBR, BVD, all of those can cause those cows to lose an embryo as well. Those can be managed effectively. The calf death loss, this is one that once you've gone through that whole process, gone through pregnancy and have one of them hit the ground, dystocia is still one of the biggest ones. And in today's time, with all the EPDs and everything else that we have out there, I do not understand why dystocia is still one of the bigger issues. You may have a predator issue as well. And so that is something that we've seen in operations where they have a lot of, whether it be, a lot of them have big cats. Town dogs are the worst a lot of times. Coyotes can be, but they'll normally only take the week. So once again, it comes into play in what is causing your loss. Castration. I put that one up there because we've run into some situations going through the SPA database where they had a pretty significant loss in calves from branding to weaning. And so we really got to tracking where that was, and we got to checking their tally books, and the loss was occurring in the steer calves. They were rushing through the castration process and causing some real problems, and they were losing 3% more of their steers than they were heifers. So that's all something, one, from being trained and doing it right, can cut down a significant amount of death loss. And there's ways to do it. So once again, fine-tuning. You may not be losing that many, but looking at clostridial organisms, I've seen guys that wouldn't vaccinate for blackleg because he didn't think he needed to. Well, they get to 400 or 500 pounds and fall over dead. Doesn't take very many of them to pay for a lot of clostridial vaccines. So once again, make sure you're not doing something silly trying to save a few pennies. Once again, cost-effective use of technologies that are out there. Cow death loss, a lot of that's due to dystocia, and it may not be big calves, may be backwards or leg back or something else, but we do have some cow death loss, but also from clostridial organisms, which a lot of people call blackleg, but it's actually not the same one that kills the calves, it's a different one. We have some hardware there. We probably had more hardware death loss since the drought started as we're grazing closer and stranger environments than what we've had in the past. We've seen more hardware. We've seen a tremendous increase in the number of cows dying from unexplained causes in Texas through our diagnostic lab, and they're attributing everything from minerals to something else. I don't think the minerals are as big a play as some of the agroceriosis issues we might have had on some of those places, but it can be a problem. I'm going to go through a little scenario here. If you got 100 cows, based on what we saw this morning, you're going to calve anywhere from 88 to 85% of them. All right, that's how many of them get bred. Let's say we have 70% of them calve in the first 21 days. What is a good number for the first 21 days? It's normally 60 to 65%, somewhere in there, but I went 70. You'd have 60 calves in the first 21 days. Then you'd have about 20% of them calve in the second 21 days. And then you'll always have these tail enders. And it's amazing to me how many of us will keep these cattle in the herd. Why not cleave that off and make them all calve earlier? But invariably we'll keep them and we'll have just a few more calves. It messes up the whole management program as well to go 90 plus days. If we looked at what those calves would weigh, 60 calves weighing 500, 72% of the weight comes out of those that calved in the first 21 days, 17% comes out of the second set. And why is that weighing different? They're younger. The biggest factor affecting weaning weight is age, right? And so we might put a lot of emphasis on weaning weight in our operations, but we don't ever standardize age. Until we do that and we're weaning at the same time every year, it doesn't really mean anything. And even in environmental conditions, it doesn't mean a whole lot. Only 8% of your weight is coming out of those last 8 calves. Now, when they weigh what they do and they bring what they do, maybe there is some incentive to do that. But once you allow yourself to go down that road, you're keeping cattle that are not as fertile as the other cattle in the herd. Once again, goes back to that genetic component. Average weaning weight in that scenario is 484 pounds. Now, if we just take and have half the calves born in the first 21 days, 40% in the second, 10 in the last, looking at what our percentage is, we're still having about half of our weight coming out of the first group instead of 70%, 36% out of the middle group. And our weight calves are still bringing up the bottom, but our weaning weights dropped 14 pounds just on calving distribution. Okay, so as you add that up, that makes money in your pocket. And once again, I started to do the math on what those were worth if you sold them all for one price. And if you're selling a calf crop, you're going to sell them all for one price, right? Now, if you go to an auction market, are they all going to bring the same price? No, they're all individually going to bring a price, right? So it's kind of difficult to do. Depending on how you're marketing cattle, this can make a big difference. And if you're selling on one price, these calves are worth a hell of a lot more than them lightweight ones are. But if we look at those particular areas where we can make a difference in percent of the cows that are conceiving, pay attention once again to the nutrition. That goes back to everything that Hugh and everybody else has talked about, managing the forage base, having adequate nutrition in them. It's going to become harder and harder as our climatic conditions wane to make sure we do that if we don't adjust stocking rate. Now, we really need to, in my opinion, back off on stocking rate to where we've got a manageable forage system. I think that's been brought up several times today, but that's a major component of what we're talking about. Have that right. Keep your health on your cows adequate to try to get as many cows bred as possible. The biggest problems that I've seen the last few years have been in disease encroachment into your cow herd, trick being the number one problem that I've seen that will. And how long does it take before you really notice trick being in a set of cows? Normally it's about 3 years. The first year you'll have a little lower conception rates. Still have a pretty high percentage of the cows, but some of them start calving later. The second year they start shifting later once again. The third year, that's when we normally see those 60 to 65% calf crops or lower. Don't be that guy. Don't be that person that doesn't pay attention and lets it progress that far. And so if you get in that situation, whether it be any disease whatsoever, one, figure out, don't be ashamed of it. A lot of people won't tell everybody they have trick. You don't have trick. It's the bull and the cow that have trick. Fess up. Get some help. All right? But it's amazing. People will not admit they have it. And even, I don't know what it's like in Texas, but Animal Health Commission even stopped notifying adjacent ranches that their neighbor had trick. I don't know what y'all's regulations are here. That's a disaster. If you don't know that neighbor had trick, you don't know to test. And one time they were testing adjacent places. They quit that for a while, but I think they put it back in place. So if they're not making you do it yourself. Everybody said, well, I don't want to lose the good genetics I have. Well, what a stupid thing to think. You're going to lose it anyway if they're not breeding, right? So get it out of your herd as quick as you can before you infect all of your bulls. And that's another thing. If you're bringing in cattle in the restocking mode, manage those cattle separately. Don't mix bulls from that herd into the next breeding group the next year. Have a designated set of bulls to go on a set of purchased cows. And that, because you can get trick from the cow. Everybody says the trick comes from the bull. How did the bull get it? From a cow. All right? So that's the only way a bull can get infected is to have an infected cow. If it keeps showing back up in your herd and you don't have bulls that are coming into your operation with trick, then it's there's a typhoid Mary in your herd. And that's when it gets tough to try to find her. And they're packing trick and infecting bulls and you're not able to get rid of it.